welcome to Minhag Dirigo, a Jewish Maine podcast. Joining to me tonight is Erica Nadelhaft, who works as education coordinator for Maine's Holocaust and Human Rights Center. It was founded in 1985 by Shoah survivor Gerda Haas. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You are?
Okay. 40 years now, the HHRC has had the mission of the Holocaust, they've had this mission to promote universal respect for human rights through outreach and education, using the lessons of the Holocaust and other events, past and present. We encourage individuals and communities to reflect and act upon their moral responsibilities to confront prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination. I took that from your website. That seems about right.
Sounded familiar.
Since today's podcast is discussing the Shoah or the Holocaust with a one of our resident Maine experts, I did want to start a little different. We can't escape October 7th, and really for many of us in Jewish institutional leadership or anything having to do with Jewish education, back as far as 2006 with the Seattle Federation shootings, and at least Tree of Life in 2018. There's been an unending anxiety for our safety as anti-Semitism, particularly violent anti-Semitism, increases beyond what most of us within living memory have experienced. I'm Gen X, late stage Gen X. Uh, I've experienced instances of anti-Semitism in the military and in real life, but it's never been an institutionalized variant. It's never been so front and center as it is now in politics, left or right. My kids, I'm sure your kids and grandchildren will grow up acclimated to it in ways that we didn't have to, whether that's in like their K to 12 experience here in Maine or when they get to university. And I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted of talking about it. And we absolutely need to. But I like to start this a little differently tonight because our almost ritual focus on the troubles of being Jewish is kind of making it hard. It's crowding out Jewish joy. It's making it decorative, if not altogether obsolete. And I feel like that's so dangerous for us. So communicating joy rather than inhabiting our sorrow feels really necessary. Um, Lives in our kitchens. The joy lives in our synagogues. It lives in our summer camps, our social media, our group chats, and in our households. And we have all these memories that start with, you wouldn't believe this, but, and these stories that get funnier every time we tell them. And no pogrom, no event has ever taken that away from us in our history. We'll outlive what the talk show hosts say and this horrible period that we're living through. So I just my Jewish joy comes from prayer and studying and spreading the love of Jewish texts and our traditions and our prayers. And I wanted to start off asking you, I know it's putting you on the spot, uh, but before we get into the meat of what you do, where do you find Jewish joy? What's meaningful to you about your Jewishness?
It's a great question, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot because, as you said, when we're constantly faced with just, the sort of awfulness and insecurity and really fear of the time that we're living in, um, I need that joy to really ground me. And to enable me to continue doing the work that I do. And for me, the joy is in the community, is being part of a Jewish community, particularly the Jewish community here in Bangor that I grew up with, being at shul week after week, coming for, minyan on a Monday or Thursday or Sunday morning, and feeling part of a community that is really solid, that has been there for well over a century. The synagogue that I grew up in, and also thinking about how it's not just our community, but all over the United States, all over the world, in Israel, Jewish communities, we are still doing what we have always been doing. We're still all of us, singing the Shema and reading the Torah and saying the prayers and meeting for a meal and celebrating our holidays. We are still here after, after everything that sort of happened to us over the past, 2000 years or so. We go right on. And, we get married, we have children, our children have children, we have bat mitzvahs, we have all of those pieces, and we haven't lost that. So for me, it's just immersing myself in my community. Like you, I think also reading Jewish texts, studying for me sort of the philosophy behind things. I tried my hand at Talmud. I was not particularly good at it, but just I get tremendous joy and thinking about. And I had this conversation with someone who's in a similar field who's also sort of struggling with where we are today. And I said, we don't define ourselves the way the outside world does. Anti-Semitism and the violence and the hatred, that's coming at us from the outside. That is not who we are. We can't necessarily change how other people view us. I mean, I know we're trying, but I don't know if we'll ever be successful. But that's not who the Jewish people are. We are a creative, a kind, a just, a peaceful, a thoughtful people who's, you know, I become inarticulate sometimes trying to express this, but I remind myself that who we are is not how other people necessarily see us and how the haters see us. And I have to separate myself from that and find joy in the community that we have always been, even with our ups and downs as a community when sometimes we are our own worst enemy, we are still a community. So
Yeah,
that
it's a
may have been
great
a very
South.
long roundabout answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, that's fantastic, and you're very articulate, so that's great. Um, well, I mean, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What led you to your career in teaching the Holocaust?
Sure. I grew up in a very secular Jewish family. We certainly were Jewish, but there was no real connection, I think, to a religious community of any sort but yet I was always drawn to it. And when I was 6, I announced that I wanted to go to Hebrew school. Nobody was planning to send me, but they had no objection. And I simply fell in love with being Jewish is the only way I can describe it. I just thought this is my place in the world, being Jewish. And went off to Brandeis University just to study history, got sort of sucked into Jewish history and then took a course on the Holocaust my senior year. And I thought, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to study. And so I went off to Hebrew University in Jerusalem to, get a degree in Holocaust studies. Studied with amazing, amazing professors. Came back here to work on my dissertation back at Brandeis, and took a very roundabout route, taught for many years in the University of Maine system, nothing to do with the Holocaust, and then 5 or 6 years ago, opened up at the Holocaust and Human Rights Center, and I thought, finally, I have found my place. I had actually been offered a job at the museum in Washington, but they offered me the job about really about less than 2 weeks after I found out I was pregnant with my first daughter. And so I had to turn the job down because moving to Washington and having a baby was just financially was not going to work for me. But I did find, even though I knew this was what I wanted to do with my life, it's very personal. Many of my family members died during the Holocaust, but I took a very long break from it when I was raising my children. I discovered I couldn't do both at the same time. I couldn't be immersed in the Holocaust while I was raising young Jewish children. So I walked away from it for quite a while
I guess,
before feeling like I could circle back and
I,
and continue doing the work.
I guess that kind of answers the next question a little bit. I gather it takes an emotional toll teaching this difficult
Yes.
material. So
It does. It really does. And so yeah, there were times when I just thought I can't I can't do this and do other pieces of my life. But it's very easy, I think, when you're studying, studying Shoah or you're teaching to become really sort of obsessed with it and overwhelmed by it. And I remember when I was a graduate student, in Jerusalem, and my advisor, I had Yehuda Bauer for an advisor, and he was just my hero. Um, and he called me in, and I think there were one or two other of students, and he said, "You have to have a life." He said, I'm watching you all drown in this. You can't make it better by losing yourselves in this in the Holocaust. Do good work in the hol but have a life, have joy, have other parts to your life. And so I've taken that with me, and there are times even now where I say, I need to walk away. I need to walk away for a day or for a week or whatever, and do some other work, and then I will come back. Um, so yeah, I think you learn as you do the work that you have to sort of protect your core self because you will lose yourself in it, or at least I have a tendency to lose myself in it.
that's yeah, wow. I yeah, and as an aside, what was did with what you were learning in context, did that shape any of your outlook on your time in Israel? Did that did or were you able to enjoy being in Israel on its own merits? And
I loved being in Israel. I was there for 5 years. I don't want to say I loved every minute of it. I was there during the first Intifada, so there were times when I was, it's a little, it was a little unsettling. But I loved being in Israel, and I will be honest, I meant to be back in Israel. I came back here just to do my PhD and got sidetracked. I got married. I had 3 children. And the next thing I knew, I had not gone back to Israel. So no, I think it was it was a part of my being in Israel studying this, but there's so much more to being in Israel than simply, and for me, my time in Israel, again, it's to be on the land, to be on to be in the place where so much history happened. Just it, it was a wonderful experience, and I go back periodically, and I feel the same way. There's something about touching the places that have been part of our history for me that um, I don't get anywhere else. So.
yeah, it's been a few years for me. I haven't been back since the late 90s, and I oh gosh, I really want to get back. I don't, there's a lot of folks are talking about moving there. A lot of my friends have moved since October 7th, and I've been resisting the pressure largely because they don't have good ice fishing. But they are,
That's
it's
true.
such,
You will not find that there.
it's still such a wonderful place. And
Yeah.
yeah, uh, um, well, if you had to identify, what do you find being the biggest challenge in teaching Shoah to children today or students today? I'm sure you have a range of ages that you're teaching to.
We work with students in middle and high school, basically grades 7 and up. We also work with, community groups, so we work with adults as well. We do not go into elementary schools to talk about the Holocaust. We have been asked, we say no, we really, and we also are, we are not students' first. Experience of the Holocaust. We come in after the teachers have really introduced the subject. We are not their first contact with the Holocaust. our programming really, looks at a very specific topic or discusses very specific questions, but we do not come in and just teach the Holocaust. That is the role of the teachers, and they have their own curriculum. Like we are there to support, to supplement, and to, sort of complement what they are doing. Um, Challenges, I think, can be one. Maine is a very rural state, and many of the schools and the communities that we are going into, there is no Jewish community there. There are no Jewish students. So we're talking about, the murder of 6 million Jews with students who've never met a Jewish person. And that was something I realized quite early on when I came into this job. And I thought we actually need a program that introduces students to Jews and to Jewish life and to what is Judaism, what were the Jews of Europe like? What do Jews believe? What do they look like? Not that one can, but so that they could understand what's lost. If you don't understand what was and who these people were, and I don't mean this to sound offensive, but we might as well be talking about elephants or something. Like they have no knowledge of, okay, 6 million Jews died. Well, okay, they so
Yeah.
that I think was the first really big challenge was realizing that we're coming in and teachers are teaching the Holocaust and we're bringing these programs in. And I'm probably the first Jew that many of them have actually met. And so I think being able to go back and fill in those gaps, that was the first real challenging piece, I think, for
It,
me.
it's remarkable how many for a state with where Jews are so spread out all over the place and in such little pockets. It's always fascinating to me just how high quality the caliber of some of these public school teachers are when it comes to the
Yes.
Holocaust. I'm not going to remember the name of the gentleman in Caribou. I've had friends from the Maine Army National Guard that have told me about they learned about the Holocaust from this one guy in Presque Isle or Caribou, one of the two, and there's another
Yeah.
person out in Ellsworth that's been not only a great Holocaust teacher but a friend to us. Do you see an
Yes.
evolution in the way it's taught? Um,
I think
by
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, it's a
Um, there's great work being done out there, and of course, as you know, Maine is a local control state, so there is no state curriculum. So teachers are really on their own deciding, how they're going to structure a course, what they're going to read or whatnot. And so they are doing, absolutely wonderful work. And there are more and more resources available. I think what strikes me every time, when I go in, when we're asked into a classroom and we're working with a teacher, is how passionate and committed they are to not just teaching it because, they have to fulfill the state mandate and they have to meet social studies standards, but to making it, I hate to say a meaningful experience for their students, but one where their students are moved and their students are connected and engaged with it, and how open the teachers are to learning and to asking, um, and to bringing in new resources. I haven't been in this school, again, I've been in this job for 5 or 6 years, so I don't really know what it was like prior to that. I mean, I can think back to my own high school experience in Maine where I don't think the Holocaust was mentioned. In all 4 years, I learned about it in Hebrew school and from family, and but I have no memory of it being discussed at all as a student in Maine. So clearly there are schools that are teaching it, and my children, growing up in Aroostook County, they started talking about the Holocaust in fifth grade up there. So yeah.
so
So
early. It's,
yeah, I mean, it was, you read a book, you read Number of the Stars, but
uh,
they did a unit on they had to know what the Holocaust was, and so the teachers there were beginning the conversation. It then continued in middle school. I don't know if I don't believe it was taught again in the high school, but certainly in fifth grade, and then I believe again in eighth grade, they covered it. Um,
Well, a few years ago, we were asked, so we participated. Congregation Beth Israel lobbied on behalf of that genocide education bill that
yes.
made it through the Maine legislature. Has you have you has that had a measurable effect on, to your mind, on the state of, well, genocide or Holocaust education in the state of Maine?
I hope so. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to know exactly. I think certainly teachers that were teaching it already are, now feel even more supported. Um, we certainly are asked, very on a very regular basis to come in and work with schools all over the state. But again, because Maine is such a local control, local school boards and local curriculum, it's really hard to know. They can choose to meet the standards or to meet, that mandate however they want to. But I think there's some really, really good work going on. And the Maine Department of Education, had put out what they call the Moose modules, with a whole series on Holocaust and genocide education that, I was involved in creating. And I know those get a lot of use. And there are a lot of resources that are now available for teachers, and certainly we provide teacher training for teachers, who want to bring the material back to their classroom.
Oh, that's
But
great.
again, it's hard to get a real sense because there's no sort of survey of Maine schools. How are you teaching the Holocaust, and how has the mandate impacted your curriculum? You know.
Well, it's still, I know more than I did about it than I did 10 minutes ago. So thank you. No, this is fantastic. What I know it's not in the list of questions I provided in advance, but
Oh.
it's an axe to grind thing for me. Because we've had this discussion in our local district. How often do you find yourself telling people not to use the boy in the striped pajamas?
On a fairly regular basis, it's funny because the one thing when I said to you, I don't want to answer a question about books because the only thing I would have to say is I would just tell people not to use the boy in the striped pajamas or to have their students watch the film. Um, Although, I mean, that's one of the things when we run a teacher training seminar for teachers over the summer about teaching the Holocaust, and we do provide a list of these are some really great books. Here's some you don't want, we would not recommend using, and we often send them to, there's a wonderful website called Echoes and Reflections with lesson plans on how to teach teaching the Holocaust. It's associated with Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. And they have a whole blog, a whole section on the boy in the striped pajamas. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I, gosh, I love nothing more than being explained to by people with no connective tissue to any of this, why that is a great book. And they're never Holocaust educators that recommend it. And it's never a
yeah,
Jew that recommends it to me. And,
right,
well,
right, yeah,
uh, and that does lead into the yeah, I know we've talked about it before. And the reason I bring it up so often is because I never received what I considered a satisfactory response from our local district about the whole imbroglio. Uh, my older daughter Avi, who she graduates Temple University this year, she had a horrible experience at one of the middle schools. Leah, my wife, is also a Holocaust educator. She was invited to speak about her family members who survived Auschwitz and Dachau, um, and share segments of their recorded testimonies that they did with the Shoah Foundation. When Spielberg was uh,
right,
really instigating that. And thank God we have that testimony as an aside, because otherwise we'd have none of these living narratives. But Avi, my daughter, was sieg-heiled and harassed by her fellow students uh, after this unit, this eighth grade unit. And the lack of the response from the district really still upsets me almost a decade later. And I'm sure more will happen to our youngest as she goes through the district. Um, do you, maybe you don't, but do you have any insights into how common this sort of thing might be in Maine schools?
Certainly, I would say anti-Semitism is very present in schools. It's affecting Jewish students, here in Maine, we hear on a regular basis. It's just as it's affecting Jewish students, throughout the United States. Um, yeah, I sadly think it's very, very common. And here I stumble because I don't. Sometimes I think it's very deliberate. A lot of times, when the kids are very young, they're simply parroting, or they're in a stage where, ooh, cool, let's do something provocative. Let's paint a draw a swastika on the bathroom wall. But they're also, what happened to your daughter. I mean, that is really bullying and hate speech, bias motivated hate speech. Um, I, the really crucial piece is how a school will respond,
Yeah.
how an administration will respond. And there are really powerful ways to respond that are helpful, and that while they don't take away the trauma to the child who's experienced it, they will show the child we are going to do what we can to keep you safe and to put a stop to this. It's a combination of education, consequences, create, but it takes a real commitment from an administration, and it's often very uncomfortable
Yeah.
for staff and for administrators to do. And then there's certainly places where they're like, we're just gonna pretend, we're not going to tackle this. We we
Right.
we don't we don't want to for whatever reason. We are not willing to, you know, to to try and affect any sort of change. But I sadly think anti-Semitism is quite common in schools, and weirdly often in schools where there are no Jewish students.
Yeah. I mean, we
We
don't
do
have,
get called into schools saying, "Hey, we're hearing these anti-Semitic slurs. Kids are doing, Heil Hitler salute, and there are swastikas. We don't have any Jewish students, but we need to talk about this." So
well, at least they are. I mean, I should take some solace that they invited Leah to speak to begin with, but
yeah.
the response, the ongoing response. I hope other people. I know I've heard good things about Bangor's district and other
Yeah.
places. So I know
Yeah.
it's not everywhere, but wow, that's
No, it isn't. It can be frustrating, for us as an organization, because we may hear of things happening in a school, whether from a parent or from, through the grapevine or we can't go into a school unless they reach out to us and ask us to come in. I mean, we do send out bulk mailings, with, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, we're a resource, we're free of charge, we would love to, but we can't, we can't, write and, call and say, hey, we heard you had an incident. Would you like us to, we have to wait to be asked. So it can be frustrating when we're really aware of a place where, you know, we or another organization could really come in and do some good work. But we're certainly not able to impose ourselves on a
yeah.
on a
And, it,
school or a district that isn't ready for whatever reason to do the work.
and I'm sure when it overlaps with discipline and such, there's probably all kinds of
Yeah.
like regulatory FERPA concerns and those kinds of
Yep.
things.
Yep. There are things we certainly can't know, and the public can't know. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Uh, so with this stuff, when you are, teaching this range of ages, how do you decide what's age appropriate, and do you find a risk of overwhelming your students of any age?
Something we really think through. We tend to have with all our programs, we have a middle school version and a high school version. So the conversations that we would have with a class of juniors in high school are not the same conversations that we would have with a seventh grade class, for example. And again, as I said earlier, we really make sure that we are not their first contact with the Holocaust. And so before we come into a school, there's a lot of prep work that we do with the teacher. They submit an intake form or a program request to us, and then, one of our educators, either me or our wonderful educator, Alexandra, reaches out to the teacher, and then there's a whole, Zoom meeting and conversation about what they're looking for, where their students are, both academically and emotionally, and so we really plan out in advance and there are times when a teacher thinks they want a particular program, and we might say it doesn't sound like this is we don't think this is going to be the right program for your students, and we could recommend something else. Ultimately, it's the teacher's choice. They know their students best. But we really talk them through the program in advance. This is what the program does. These are the questions we're going to raise. This is what it will cover. And again, we can tweak a program, according to where the students are at. But we have versions for middle school students and versions for high school students. So we're not overwhelming students. And sometimes if a teacher might say, listen, they can go for 30 minutes, we're going to need to give them a break. We'll break, the kids will go, run around, stretch, have a drink, have a snack, come back, regroup, and then continue on with the program. But our programs are not particularly long. They're between 60 and 90 minutes at the most. So, we try very hard not to overwhelm students. We acknowledge with them this is emotional for some, this may be difficult. Raise your hand, feel free to signal your teacher if you're feeling overwhelmed. But so we are very careful and cognizant, but also having to explain it's not a comfortable program. It's not a comfortable subject.
No.
That sometimes you have to sit with your discomfort or with your emotion. And if you're not feeling anything, you also need to examine that. If you're that separate or distanced from the material, why is that? That if you're not feeling, able to engage with it. And acknowledge too, students, they're teenagers, or they're 12 or they're 13. They react very differently. Some students laugh, not because they find it funny, because they're uncomfortable. For a 12-year-old is not necessarily going to want to get teary or emotional or sad in a class. It comes out as sort of laughter or making fun of something, or so being able to understand that students will react in different ways to the material. So
Well, the last two questions I have for you tonight are kind of related. Uh, and I'll long-winded set the stage for this. One of the things that really strikes me about for people, our age, we're close enough. I can say that I think
I
that
think so.
yeah, there was a time when survivors were omnipresent in our lives. They weren't diminished by age. They were still pillars of our community. And by extension, the Shoah was living memory for our generation. Um, I had a wonderful experience when I graduated Army's Airborne School and I became a paratrooper. There was General Sidney Schachnow he as a child he escaped the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania, went on to serve in Vietnam, practically invented special forces in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. He heard that there was a Jewish paratrooper graduating at the same time he was there for retirement stuff, made his way over and pinned my jump wings on my chest as I graduated. And later on, he became a very strong flag officers, organizing former flag officers for Israel. He just lived his full life all the way right up to the end as a very active advocate for the Jewish people here and everywhere. Um, and I think about even my children, my older children grew up with Leah's survivors and her family at the Passover Seder that we go to every year, or just how our students, when Leah and I were teaching Hebrew school 20 years ago, our students, we went to the local college and heard one of the Schindler Jews speak about his experiences, and he was still vibrant, not even retired yet, still working in the sound industry. Um, so I guess it's a long-winded way of asking, for us, we heard it firsthand, and now that survivor testimonies are largely recorded and not given in real time by real people, living people, or maybe they're hearing it from their descendants, they're still not hearing it from the people that lived it directly like we did. Uh, does Is there a danger that the Holocaust will become too abstract as it recedes further into history? Is there this is a lot, I'm sure. Is there a challenge in teaching it without living memory, telling, communicating it to these kids and adults?
Yes, I would say yes, yes to both. I think there certainly is a danger that, as you get more and more distant from something, it's like teaching about the Civil War now, not it's history. It was there was tremendous death and destruction and pain and all of those pieces, but it's history. It's something students learn in a book and they do. So the challenge is how do you keep this relevant and important and alive in in students students' lives? That is really a challenge with with we really don't have survivor testimony, or immediate survivors who can still come into schools the way ten years ago we had survivors who would regularly be able to go into schools. So we had to get very creative in using survivor testimony as part of our programs, whether it be video testimony or text that we have. We have a recently published book, from the Holocaust to Maine, testimonies of survivors, who settled in Maine, that has just come out, written by Jack Montgomery, with testimony from Maine survivors. So we use that testimony. We have video testimony, but finding ways to make sure that we tell individual stories so that it doesn't become it's not just a chapter in a history book. These were people, these are their stories. We use artifacts that we have, we have shoes from the camps, or a teddy bear, for, and to maintain as much as possible that connection to individuals. We use names. This was the person's name, this was their story, this was their childhood, this was their birthday. This is where they lived, this is what their parents did, this is what they remember eating, on Shabbat, or whatever, to just make it as human a story as possible. But I think, as with any event, as it becomes come further and further away, you will lose some of that. And yeah,
It's
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 scary
a
and
it's a
sad.
it's a hard note to end on, but goodness, Erica, thank you so much for joining me in this. And you are doing such incredible work. I can say, as president of Congregation Beth Israel, that I am so grateful for your presence in the community and everything that you do. We are so much better for you being around and leading from the front on this issue, this very important education. You're, I God knows, and I'm grateful for the HHRC and what they do in the state of Maine, but most especially you. So thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be.